Hi, I'm Darrin Peppard. Welcome to the Leaning into Leadership podcast, the podcast dedicated to today's hardworking leader. Join me every Sunday for leadership insight, inspiration, and a little pep talk to keep you rolling down your road to awesome. Have you ever had one of those conversations where from the very beginning, you just knew this person gets it? This person and I are going to see eye to eye. This is somebody I want to stay in contact with. Well, that was me. That was my reaction to my first conversation with today's guest, Dr. Chris Hobbs. I met Dr. Hobbs about a year and a half ago. Like many of our connections, it happened in a similar way. We were connected on social media. I was following him on Twitter. Chris was following me. And one of the interesting pieces that I found with his work was his blog. His blog is titled Bite Down and Don't Let Go. Yeah, that's a really super cool name, but there's an even cooler story behind where he came up with that title. When I first got on a Zoom call with Chris, I discovered very quickly how passionate he was, not only about leadership, but about his continual growth, improvement, and learning. Chris is arguably the best read person I know. He's going to give you a couple of great book recommendations during this episode. And Chris is just super passionate about so many things that have led him to have a very successful 20-year career in education. Chris has worked in the suburbs of Washington, D.C., in New York City, West Palm Beach, Florida, and currently he is in Houston. His role there is Director of Institutional Advancement at Second Baptist School. He provides global leadership in that role for admissions, advancement, communication, and marketing for 4 different campuses, 2 different models of education, and nearly 4,000 students. Chris was also named during his time in Florida as the National High School Athletic Director of the Year by BSN and Varsity Brands. You're going to love this conversation today with Dr. Chris Hobbs, and we'll get to that in just one moment. Have you registered yet? The Teach Better Conference is right around the corner, folks, and space is limited. The design of the Teach Better 22 conference is intended to foster more than just a learning environment. Yes, the event will be filled with rich professional development opportunities shared by educators worldwide on effective grading practices and mastery learning essentials, student engagement, strategic leadership development, mentoring tips, co-teaching tips, language learner development, and so much more. But it won't end there. Teach Better events also are committed to networking and building a supportive network of solution-seeking educators. Therefore, expect epic evening events to help you socialize with all members of the Teach Better family. Make sure you register now. Join us for this incredible 2-day event. It is taking place October 14th and 15th in Akron, Ohio. Folks, you do not want to miss this particular event. And if you haven't registered yet, as one of the sponsors of the Teach Better Conference, Road to Awesome can give you a special code, and I'm going to give that to you in just a second, to save you $50 off of your registration. So go to teachbetterconference.com and use the code RTATB2022. That's RTATB2022, and you'll save $50 off your registration for the Teach Better Conference. I'll be there. I know there's a lot of amazing people who will, but will you? I will see you October 14th and 15th in Akron, Ohio for the Teach Better Conference. And now, folks, let's get to this incredible conversation with Dr. Chris Hobbs. I'll see you on the other side. All right, Chris, welcome into the Leaning into Leadership podcast. My friend, it is really good to see you. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great, Darrin. I do feel like the virtual world is such a weird space sometimes. I feel like because of watching you and Road to Awesome and everything that's going on social media with you all, and then being involved in some of your stuff in December, I feel like we know each other very well, and yet we've never actually stood in the same room together. And so it's good to see you.
Thanks so much. It's interesting, right? I mean, we probably in the last, 2, 3 years, so many of us have built so many relationships with people that we have yet to be in the same room with. It's kind of interesting. Over the course of this last maybe 6 months, I've been able to connect with a handful of people, that I've met in exactly that way, and it's kind of funny, when you get to meet somebody for the first time that you've known, through Zoom or whatever for quite some time, that, oh my gosh, they're a lot taller than I thought they'd be, or they're shorter than I thought they'd be, or, whatever. So I don't know. It's definitely been interesting the last couple of years, to say the very least.
There's social media really is social. There's no doubt about that.
Yeah, 100%. So before we dive in, Chris, just real quick, for my listeners who don't know who Dr. Chris Hobbs is, tell them a little bit about yourself, what you've got going on, what you're all about, that type of thing.
Yep, excellent. So over 20 years now working in education. It's all been private schools up and down the East Coast. I am the product of educators. My father is over 40 years now working in education, most of it in educational leadership. And so spent a long time as an athletic administrator at a couple schools. And currently I am the director of institutional advancement at Second Baptist School here in Houston, Texas. It is it's a really, really unique time here at Second Baptist School. We are now offering 2 models of education, traditional education, like probably many of our listeners are familiar with, as well as offering a university model classical education on 3 different campuses. And so globally, we are evolving really, really fast. And so my specific role, I provide global leadership as it pertains to admissions, advancement, marketing, and communications for our school, which is 4 campuses now. And in just less than a month now, we announced the launching of 2 new campuses. And things are moving really fast here, so it's an exciting time, and it's a super fun role to have in the midst of all that.
Yeah, I recall not the last time, but one of the first times I think you and I connected over Zoom. At that time, you were still an athletic director in Florida. And then, of course, I think even during that time, you had said, there's this possibility that my role might be changing and I might be, moving to Texas. What has that transition been like? Yeah. So now you're leading on a global scale. You were leading, in the athletics area, of course, at a national powerhouse high school, but definitely a different scope. What has that transition been like for you?
Yeah. So it's been a transition that I really wanted to engage in. There were some wonderful things that I had learned in athletic administration, and so much of leadership is, and I don't want to make people uneasy. So much of leadership is like you're testing some things, like how can I best organize people? How can I best inspire people? How can I best care for people? And so you are testing things and tweaking things, and hopefully for leaders, you're doing it for the benefit of the folks around you. You're not doing it just for yourself. But along the way, hopefully, if you do anything long enough, you start to learn some good lessons, and hopefully you learn by failing and you get sharper and sharper. And so that had certainly been true of my career as an athletic administrator. And then, you start to get kind of a little suspicion that, hey, there might be a broader context for this, or a different context for this. And so that was a small part, but a part certainly of the transition for me, taking what I had learned in how to quite honestly care for coaches, and does that apply in context outside of athletics? And so that is what kind of drew me here. And what has it been like? It has been really, really rewarding because at the end of the day, if you get really good at communicating with people and caring for people, then you'll probably be able to lead effectively in a lot of different contexts. And so I've got a framework I use anytime I make a big transition. I've made a couple of them, not a lot, but a couple of them. And so the framework is CASA, C-A-S-A. So when I'm in the midst of a leadership transition, I use this to kind of guide me through that, to keep me steady, because transition is disruptive, right? Disruption is not a bad word. It's just a word, but it is complex and complicated when you go through disruption. And so to guide me through the disruption of new leadership opportunities, I use CASA. The C is connect with anyone and everyone, like prioritize being connected with people. The A is ask a million questions, pretend like you don't know anything. Because honestly, if you're in a new context, you probably don't know anything. Certainly they don't care what you know at that point. And so ask. The S is serve. I think servant leadership has a massive return on investment. And so find ways, big and small, to serve the people you're responsible to lead. And then the final A is aim, right? Like keep your eyes aiming towards your professional growth. So often when you go through a leadership transition, personal growth falls off the list because you're just immersed in such a new world, and it is disorienting. I mean, you don't know people's names, you don't know what key opens which door, you can't find your way around campus, all those things that happen when you're a new leader, or really new in any context, regardless of your leadership position. You forget to keep growing yourself. And so I try and make that aim. I keep that on the list. And so I just finished up my first year, really relying on that framework, and it is super helpful. The first years always have challenges, but I feel good that I navigated them that first year. That framework is really helpful for me. CASA.
Yeah, for sure. Well, I love that that acronym. I think all four of those are really, really powerful. I actually just released a blog post yesterday. A friend of mine, out of the blue, calls me early in the week, and he had just retired from education. He was an assistant superintendent, and he had transitioned into the private business world. Got a phone call at the start of the week. Hey, we'd like you to come be our interim superintendent at another district very close to where he lives. And of course, because he's one of the best servant leaders I've ever known, he said yes. He started the job today, as we're recording this on a Friday. And what he reached out to me for was like, okay, how do I put together an entry plan here? I mean, what do I do? And exactly what you just talked about is so much in alignment with some of the things I told him. And in fact, what I kind of coined his first 3 months is the great listening tour. You go listen to virtually everybody you can find, kids included, parents, whomever, so you can learn everything you can. Because I think what you said in there too, Chris, that, they don't really care what you know. They want you to know what's going on here. And they want to, help you kind of assimilate that knowledge and blend it together, if you will, with what the current situation is. So I'm really curious. So you just said you just finished up your first year. It's hard to believe that you've already been in this role for a year. But I'm wondering what's maybe one or two things you learned about yourself in this last year that maybe you uncovered that you didn't realize in previous leadership roles.
Yeah, that's a great question. And so I think maybe I can frame that up through really what I was excited about last year as opposed to what I'm excited about this year. And so that first year, I was really excited about the opportunity I'd been in athletic administration for probably 16 or 17 years. And so I was really excited about this opportunity to try and lead in a different context. And now this year, I'm really excited about the people. It's so hard to be excited about the people last year because you don't even know them, right? And so This year, you know some names and faces, you have a little bit of familiarity, and so you can get really excited about the people. And so last year, when you're excited for the opportunity, you really do have to work intensely on listening. So what I learned last year was how important it is to listen, because you've got to remind yourself they really don't care what you know. They really just want to be known by this new leader, and so the way you make them feel known is you just listen. And I had an experience of being on a virtual leadership seminar with a guy named Alan Stein Jr. I actually blogged about this a couple months ago, and Alan was so intense with his face when we were on this virtual seminar together. His face, he looked like he was so intensely engaged with everything. And I just really thought to myself how important it is to use your face right. And so probably what I learned last year, and the people here have been great. And so we really felt great about the conclusion of our first year together. And I think a big reason for that is I tried to be very intentional about using my face, you know, emote to people, through your face that you care about them, that what they know matters, that the answers to your questions that they have matters. And so eyebrows up, bright eyes, responding to them often in additional questions. One of the things I said quite a bit last year is I would repeat to them what I thought I heard they were saying, and then I would say, hey, am I being accurate? Is that accurate? Do I have an accurate understanding of what you just shared with me? Because, at a place that's evolving as fast as this, sooner rather than later, I was really busy playing air traffic control for some wonderful departments and department heads, and navigating their information and gathering it and repurposing it for executive level and global level meetings. And so accuracy was important. I needed them to trust me that I would be accurately representing them in different contexts. And so I think a lot of that started with my face, like really being intentional about my face and how important that is to people. And none of us would be surprised by that if you think about that. How much of communication is body language versus how much of it is, your actual voice. We've all seen that type of research where it's like 85% of communication is nonverbal, and so an encouragement to leaders out there as you're going into whether you're in your 20th year or your first year, at a place, be very, very aware of your face and the message that it's sending. So that's probably something I tried to be intentional about last year, and I learned how important and how valuable that could be.
I just love that. I mean, that's not something that, first off, it's not what I expected to hear you say. That's for sure. But that's good. I mean, I love that. That's something that I think a lot of leaders definitely are not super conscious about. Honestly, you mentioned leader in their first year. I know a lot of leaders that I work with and that I'm coaching, among their struggles are right what you just also talked about, which is listening. And I love how you said, not only paraphrase, but then come back with, am I accurate? So you're actually checking your own understanding, not necessarily checking theirs. But the other piece that does, and I guess I want to chase this a little bit further, is it validates their feelings. It validates their beliefs or their thoughts just as much as for you. It's, I got to make sure I'm accurate here. We know even our people who really struggle. I mean, sometimes we'll label people, that work in our school or in our department or whatever as being resistant or, being obstinate or not on board, that kind of thing. When the truth is, most of the time, it's just people really want to be heard. And so by doing exactly what you just described, to me, that's the ultimate validation of allowing people to be heard. Maybe go just a little deeper there. We have a lot of, I know, first, second, third year leaders who listen into this podcast. What's something a little bit more? Give them another gold nugget, because that one was so good.
Yeah. So back to that response of, am I being accurate, or that follow-up question. There's some great thought leaders out there on habits of coaching, not coaching in an athletic context, but coaching in any context. Michael Stangier, that's written The Coaching Habit. Scott Eblin, that has written The Next Level. And it's about leaders going from the level they're at to the next level. And they both have a lot to say about follow-up questions. Stangier's got one called AWE. When you're really trying to get down to a matter with someone, or you're really trying to help them understand, or maybe you just sincerely need to know where they're at after you've asked them how they're doing, they give you the standard answer like we always do. Hey, how are you doing? Oh, I'm good. Michael Stangier says, ask, and what else? Literally follow up with the question, and what else? And he said that's when you begin to really unpack and connect with folks and find out where they're actually at. So that being said, am I being accurate? Is a leader giving people on his or her team permission to speak truth into what they believe they know, and so again, it's at that point where it really isn't all that important in that moment what the leader knows. It's much more important that the individual feels like they are known and that the leader knows what they want them to know. And so I just feel like that follow-up question of am I being accurate really opens the door wide for people to speak freely about whatever the matter happens to be, especially when a leader is responsible to advocate for a group somewhere else. In that moment, you want those people to trust that you will go advocate for them in another context, in another meeting, take their concerns or their initiatives or their excitement, take it up another level. That little follow-up question of am I being accurate helps to, in my opinion, open the door so those folks can sense that you really are going to advocate for them.
I think in addition to that, it's an incredible trust builder. The amount of trust and I guess almost kind of in that that emotional bank. You're making deposits constantly with those folks by saying those types of things, because now it's hey, I can trust Dr. Hobbs. I may not get what I want, but I know he is advocating for me or he is hearing what I have to say. So I think there's just so much that goes with being that. I don't even want to call it an active listener because it's so much more than that. It's like being an engaged listener really is what that is being. So you said something else in there, and like always, it's going to bounce me into another question. It was one I was hoping we would get to, so I'm going to take advantage of this. You talked a little bit about coaching, and like you said, not athletic coaching in general. And to me, I think it's one of the most important responsibilities that a leader has is to coach and grow other leaders. Now, let's go back first to your time as an athletic director and the work you were able to do to coach your coaches. And then I want to spin that forward to what you're able to do now in this role. Who are you coaching and how do you get to coach them? But like I said, let's go back first to as an athletic administrator. How do you coach coaches?
Yeah. So really the entire topic of coaching, in my opinion, swirls around, or maybe the center of gravity is feedback. The entire experience is about feedback, and feedback is just so important. Honest feedback, positive feedback, critical feedback, negative feedback, like every version of feedback that you can imagine is so important. And if you're going to do it effectively, you've got to have very tight feedback loops. And what I mean by that is you can't allow feedback to be delayed any more than it needs to be. If you think about athletic coaching, particularly in a practice setting, the best coaches are the ones that are giving just continuous feedback. There's some research out there from John Wooden, the great John Wooden's time coaching at UCLA, and he won, I think it was 10 national championships in 12 years or something. Probably no one else will ever do it. Yeah. They said that, Wooden's feedback was always less than 15 seconds. And yet the quantity of feedback in a practice session far exceeded anything else they ever observed or watched at any other coach. So it was continuous, it was constant, it was tight feedback loops, and yet it didn't belabor the point. It wasn't like, these massive monologues where he's stopping and just droning on. It was just constant drips of feedback. And so, I've always thought about that, and it's so easy to do that in the high intensity pace of an athletic practice. But you've got to do some things in and around your schools and your organizations so that you, as a leader, you're just providing, just tight feedback loops. Once you get in that rhythm, you can really begin to coach people up. And so in the context of an athletic director, you've got to be near people to give them, tight feedback loops. You've got to be around people. So that meant just a lot of time at practices. It's been a lot of time, post game, connecting with coaches, all those types of things. You've got to be near them. Proximity does have a big impact on how you can coach people. Now, you don't need proximity to lead massive organizations. There's ways to lead organizationally without proximity. There's no way some of the CEOs of some of these massive conglomerates lead with proximity being a factor. They just can't, right? Like the volume just doesn't allow
Yeah.
for it. You're going to coach people. There's got to be proximity. You've got to be in close proximity to coach people so that you can nurture tight feedback loops. And so I say that to say it's probably much easier in my context to do that now than it was in my context as an athletic director, because so many of those coaching was not their primary job. In a school setting, they're teachers in the hallways, they're, administrators in the hallways. Sometimes, many cases, they weren't even working at the school until they showed up after school for practices and games. And so to have that proximity and those tight feedback loops now is much easier, because all my people that I'm responsible to and responsible for, they're all right here in the building with me all day, every day. And so interacting with them so that we can have close proximity, so that we can have tight feedback loops is easier to do here than it was as an athletic director. Though I loved it just because it was the context of sport as an athletic director. I loved that, but doing it here has been a little bit easier.
Yeah, for sure. I think, I think there's just so much that is rewarding about being able to coach the people around you and to support the people around you. And I really, really love the concept of those tight feedback loops. Had not heard that story about John Wooden before, so I think that's really cool. I appreciate that you shared that. Let's go in a little bit different direction. So now, instead of talking about coaching the people around you, let's talk about sharing out leadership. You are frequently on social media sharing unsolicited leadership advice sometimes is how you've labeled some of your tweets, which I think is fantastic. And of course, you still maintain the blog, Bite Down and Don't Let Go. You got to tell a little bit of the story behind Bite Down and Don't Let Go. I know the story, but I think the listeners need to hear it too. It's fantastic. But what compels you to want to share out all of this leadership information on such a frequent basis?
Yeah. So probably a combination of things. Probably the most important thing would be it kind of lines up with some of the personality assessments and kind of the strengths and weaknesses assessments that we're all very familiar with, whether you're talking Enneagram or you're talking Clifton Strengths Finders or Berkman, or even more recently, Patrick Lencioni's Working Genius. One of the trends in mine would be that I am an obsessive learner, and closely correlated to that is, you want to share what you've learned, and then closely correlated to that with my Berkman evaluation, and certainly my Clifton Strengths Finder as well, is it matters to me that people be encouraged to go do things that are in their best interest, that are good for them, and so some people get a little mixed up on that, and they think all that sharing on social media is kind of about like drawing attention to yourself. And for me, the thing that really gets me excited is maybe someone comes across a tweet, they screenshot it, they send it to a friend as their attempt to encourage a friend. That friend looks back to them. Maybe that person's a leader. They feel well led, and like I could care less if my name or face is on that. I'm just super fired up that people are out there, grabbing onto some information that helps them do what they do better and feel better about doing it. And so encourager would be one of the trends in some of those assessments that I've done. And so that's a little bit the genesis behind it. And I put it out there. And then the other part of it is too, that such a big part of leadership is metacognition, right? Like that's a wild word. Metacognition is just thinking about what you're thinking about. And if you're going to lead yourself well, which in my opinion is a really big part of leading, you got to lead yourself well first. If you're going to do that, you've got to take time to think about what you're thinking about. And so, some people would call it, don't listen to yourself, talk to yourself. And so, we see evidence of this all over the place, whether you're talking about mental health research or mindset coaching. You would even see it in the Bible, in the Old Testament, in the book of Psalms. King David, would bemoan, and you could tell he's listening to himself, and then he pauses and he talks to himself. And so metacognition is a big part of it. And I guess Twitter in some ways is the way that I think about what I'm thinking about, when I throw out stuff like that. So some of that unsolicited leadership advice tweets that I throw out, is kind of like a tongue in cheek type thing of like, hey, I'm thinking about what I'm thinking about again, and it lands out there. So that's a little bit the genesis behind it, and then I try to be embracing of commonly well-known principles, like, for example, leaders are readers and readers are leaders, and so if you want to be an effective leader, man, you've got to consume information. Now in today's context, that podcasts have a very, very effective place. Appropriate use of Twitter. Twitter can be a dumpster fire sometimes, but it can also be a great professional activity tool, for learning things. And so it doesn't have to be true reading, but you really do have to be constantly consuming best practice type information if you're going to be an effective leader. And so that's kind of a lot of what swirls around my efforts to kind of encourage people out there on social media.
I think it's great. And folks, seriously, you do need to check out Bite Down and Don't Let Go. It's such a great blog. Real quick, the story there. Where does that come from?
So I am, I don't claim to be very mentally tough, but I am fascinated by people's persistence through difficult things on their way to achievement. And so you would see that in some of my doctoral study bent that way just a little bit in certain ways, and some of the stuff that I've published. Just fascinated by persistence through difficulty and challenge. I don't know if I'm good at it, but I'm fascinated by it. And so that was a trend in a lot of the themes I had when I was a varsity basketball coach. I always had themes of persistence. We had one called keep digging one year, keep sawing, keep chewing, right? Like I had all these things. And I came across, and I shared a story with a team one year on Winston Churchill. Winston Churchill, known for his relentless persistence as he's leading England through, quite honestly, what looked like they would lose to Nazi Germany. That's what it looked like for a long time, that they would be the last country to fall in Germany's takeover of Europe. And Churchill has these famous historical accounts where he's giving a graduation speech to an all-boys school. And that's when he says, we will never give in, and this is in the context of like Nazis' relentless bombing of England. And so what do you say to a bunch of kids that are graduating from a boys' school in a country that might not even exist in a year? And so Churchill famously said, we will never give in. We will never give up. He said it like 11 times in a 2-sentence stretch. He's got another quote of, we will fight them with broken bottles if we will have to. He was just incredibly relentlessly persistent. And he used to bring bulldogs with him to parliamentary meetings. And so it goes, don't anyone fact check me on this necessarily. I've just read these stories a couple times through some of his biographies. And so I'm just going to go with it. And so he would bring bulldogs to his parliamentary meetings. And one of the members of parliament finally got up the courage. Churchill was a barrel of a man. He was very eccentric, very strong personality. And so he was very intimidating. And one of the parliamentary members finally got up the courage to ask why Churchill was bringing a bulldog to parliamentary meetings, which was honestly, in most contexts, probably pretty inappropriate. But I mean, he kept bringing bulldogs with him. And he quipped back to that question that was asked him, they can breathe without letting go. And the context of that is, you think about dogs, they mostly have long snouts. When they bite down on something, their long snouted nose presses up against it and they can't breathe. And so, but bulldogs have snub noses. They've got these compact faces so they can get something back in their deep jaws, clench down and breathe without ever having to let go, and so Bite Down and Don't Let Go was birthed out of that idea actually from one of my basketball players. He was like, Coach, that's the best story I've ever heard. You should write about that, and next thing you know, I named the blog Bite Down and Don't Let Go, just because I do think persistence matters. So much of the important things that we will accomplish in our lives will not happen fast, and they will be hard to navigate at times, whether you're talking about parenting kids, or you're talking about leading a school, right? Like there's some research out there that you don't change culture until like year 5. It takes a leader 5 years to even begin to move the needle on changing culture. And so like persistence just is foundational to so many important things that we would like to be true about our lives. And so that's really the genesis of the blog, trying to encourage people to be intentional and persistent about leading themselves and then ultimately leading others. So, Bite Down and Don't Let Go, everyone.
Absolutely. It is a fantastic blog. So make sure, and I'll put a link in the show notes so everybody can go and check that out. It is an outstanding blog. I love reading it. I really, really, truly do. So I have two final questions for you. The first one is the question I ask everybody here on the podcast, and then the second one's going to be kind of a bonus question.
Yeah.
But first and foremost, right now, Dr. Hobbs, what are you doing to lean into leadership?
That's great. So my encouragement to everyone would be to find a way to level up your expressions of gratitude. And so if you're on the verge of sending a thank you email, to someone on your team, why don't you just go stand up and walk down to their office, shake their hand, look them in the eye, and tell them thank you and tell them why you're thanking them, right? It's very, very important that we express gratitude by name and by task, right? So when you're expressing gratitude to someone, use their name and tell them exactly why you are thanking them, why you're expressing gratitude to them. What have they done that has put you in a position to be grateful for them? And so level up your gratitude. There's some great research in the world of philanthropy that's the number one preferred way to say thank you is to pick up the phone and call someone and tell them thank you on the phone. It even trumps thank you notes, which, have a very important place as well. So I would just encourage everyone in leaning into leadership. Something I've been thinking a lot about is level up your expressions of gratitude in whatever way you were going to express your thanks. Figure out how you could turn up the dial on it just a little bit. It's amazing how important it is that leaders demonstrate gratitude to the people around them.
I love that. I think that's super important and super powerful. Great advice, folks. There, make sure that you follow through on what Chris is sharing with you there. Now, I said there was a bonus question. So, Chris, over the time that I've gotten to know you, I've discovered that you are one of the most well-read people that I know, and I'm sure folks that came through very clearly here throughout this particular interview. So what I'd like to ask of you for our listeners, for those people who love to read, you said leaders are readers, readers are leaders. What's maybe one or two books that either you're reading now or you've read recently that would just be an incredible gem for our listeners to get it in their hands and get it consumed?
Yeah, that's great. So the educational space is a big deal. Darrin, you're doing great work, encouraging and inspiring educators all over the country. And so for our educators that are listening, Generation Z Unfiltered by a guy named Dr. Tim Elmore. Tim has been in the social science as it pertains to education for quite a while now. He's got a website, growingleaders.com. And it really is about, hey, how are we, what do we know about the next generation? And he's probably, it deep dived from a social science research standpoint on, I'm going to say it's 3 generations now that he's really collected and conducted some impressive research and written some great books. And so one of his newest ones is Generation Z Unfiltered. Great book. Starts a little concerning, because we're living in complex times, but he really ends the book with some great inspiration and hope for what parents and educators can do to help guide this newest generation to flourishing. So Generation Z Unfiltered by Dr. Tim Elmore, and then one that I've really have put to use here at Second Baptist is Know What You're For by Jeff Henderson. That's a great book that applies to really any organizational context. And the biggest quote coming out of that book is by Jeff himself. And he says that the organizations, and you could flip out the word organizations for leaders, so that's what I'll do right now. The leaders of tomorrow will stop worrying about trying to make people fans of them, and they will be fully focused on being fans of their people. And so that's the strongest quote coming out of that book, in my opinion, at least. And so Jeff's book, Know What You're For, get real clear on, hey, what are you for? And then just a really great book, in my opinion, that applies to a ton of different contexts in any organizational life, education or outside education.
I really appreciate those two shares. I will tell you, folks, there have been multiple times where Chris has recommended a book and I have gone and gotten that book, and you have yet to steer me wrong. And I will definitely be grabbing both of these. I can't wait to dive into them. Again, folks, I'll link those in the show notes too. So it's not hard for you to go and locate those books. Just click on the link and then get after it. And then go and get in contact with Chris. Chris, what's the easiest way? I mean, you've mentioned Twitter. How do people get in touch with you? I will have that stuff in the show notes, but real quick, how do they connect with Dr. Chris Hobbs?
Yeah, I still have my old coaching Gmail account up and running. So you can reach me at coachchrishobbs@gmail.com. And then, I'm super engaged in Twitter, really just because I want to encourage people, excite people. I think it's a great tool to do that. And so at @Dr_Chris Hobbs on Twitter. Love to connect with people out there. And my friendship with Darrin is really a result of that medium and that platform. And so really, really grateful, Darrin, to be just a little part of all the incredible work you're doing, encouraging educators all over the country. So bravo to you, friend.
Oh, I really appreciate that, man. I do. It means a lot. I really appreciate our relationship. As you said early in the show, those relationships that have been forged, through social media, through Zoom, those types of things. There will come a day when you and I will be in the same room, and I very much look forward to that opportunity.
I can't wait to see how tall you are.
Yeah, there you go. Right on. That's outstanding right there. So, Chris, thanks so much for being on the Leaning Into Leadership podcast, man. I hope you have an awesome day. I hope you have an incredible school year. And just, again, a genuine thank you for sharing some incredible thoughts.
Keep on keeping on, Darrin. Thank you.
Hopefully now you are as hooked on Dr. Chris Hobbs as I am. He's just such a wonderful human being, and I'm really grateful for him being here on the Leaning Into Leadership podcast. So make sure you go give him a follow. I've included all of his information and the two books that he recommended as well. I've put in the show notes. And I want to jump off from there right into the pep talk this week. I was thinking about this a little bit earlier in the week and thinking about the decisions that we make. I've just taken on another new client, and when he and I met a couple of weeks ago and had some conversations, he really kind of honed in on something that I think a lot of leaders struggle with, and that is, honestly, you make probably 10,000 decisions a day. And this is true whether you're a classroom teacher, whether you're a principal, a superintendent, an AP, whatever role you might have. You make 10,000 decisions a day, and you might make 4 that aren't perfect. And for some reason, and this is true of educators, I think this is true of people that aren't in the educational space too, what we do is we tend to hone in on those 4 not so good decisions. We can't remind ourselves of the 9,996 really good decisions we've made. We just beat ourselves up over the 4 that don't go so well. My challenge for you this week as you move forward is remind yourself when you have those moments in the evening, when you're sitting, maybe you're awake at night, or you're just kind of winding down, or you're drinking your coffee in the morning, whatever it is, when you're reflecting on those 4 decisions, I want you to stop yourself and ask yourself, hey, what are a couple of the decisions I made during the course of my day that I feel real good about? Because we tend to lose that balance. We tend to forget that there are all these incredible things that we do, and we just beat ourselves up over those few little things. The last thing I want to say about the decisions that we make, of all 10,000 decisions that you make sure the one on how you're going to show up, you make correctly. Each and every morning when our feet hit the floor, we have that opportunity to decide how are we going to show up. Let's make sure every day that we bring everything we have, everything positive we can find to go and make a difference in the life of someone else. Thank you for joining me on the Leaning Into Leadership podcast. Have a Road to Awesome week. Thank you for listening to the Leaning Into Leadership podcast, brought to you by Road to Awesome. Don't forget, click subscribe, give a review, and share this with somebody who might also enjoy leaning into leadership.